This video is sponsored by Game Toppers. Turn your own kitchen or dining room table into a premium portable game solution at a fraction of the cost. Hey everybody, welcome to the next installment of my Top 50 Games of All Time series. Today we're going to be going from 30 down to 21, so let's just jump right into it. Number 30 is No Retreat, The Russian Front. This is one of many games in the No Retreat series. This is pitting Germany in World War II versus the Russians, and it's one of those big kind of theater level hex and counter style games. I have played most of the games in this series. This one is by far my favorite. It's the first one, and what this one is kind of a card driven sort of resource management game, kind of layered on top of pushing these big battalions and huge regiments of troops at each other, and there's tracking of weather and the days and the months and everything kind of move along, and there's a lot of historical inflections kind of punctuating all of the different moments in the game, and it kind of simulates kind of Germany's push towards the east and their eventual fall due to winter and a bunch of other things. It is I think the thing for me that sets this apart from the other games in the series, and this is going to be kind of hard to pinpoint, is that it feels less like a lecture and more like a game. Where some of the other games, specifically the North Africa one is the other one that I like them probably the next most. But it gets a little bit like cumbersome for me. I think a lot of sort of traditional war game type folks will probably appreciate them a little bit more, but this one is kind of pulled back enough a little bit off of that and abstracted a little bit more, it feels like, and so it feels more like a game to me. And I've just played this one a lot more than the others. The others I played at max 2 times, if not 1 time on some of the others. I think the Italian one I played once, and the French one I played a couple times, and then the North African one I played a couple times. But I really like this one. To me, this is a no-brainer. If you want like a big, heavy, kind of simulation-y kind of war game, but with a good, solid game underneath. I haven't played a lot of these big ones, but this one to me, there's just no question in my mind that I would recommend anybody try it. It's a little bit of a bear to get into at first, but it's not bad. You kind of get the flow of it pretty quickly, I would expect, and it's just a lot of fun. There's a lot of kind of interesting things you can kind of push and play around with, in terms of the history and kind of playing around with your card play and that kind of stuff, and getting the new cards kind of kind of reinvigorates the game, because you've got like this whole different kind of strategy. It's not just always like the same kind of plotting, sort of marching through history thing. It gives you some variation, some tinkering around the edges there. As far as player count, it's only a 2-player game. And as far as like the alternative, which I've been doing for this series of videos, this is very tenuous, but I would throw in Nuclear Winter 68, just because that one's still in my collection as well. When I did my top 50 about 4 years ago, these two games had kind of reversed themselves, because I was kind of more into the sort of weird World War, sort of alternate history with zombies and chemical explosions and stuff like that in Nuclear Winter 68. Nuclear Winter 68 is a very different game. There's no card play. It's a kind of a chit pull mechanism, so you're kind of have these weird alternating activations. There's actually 3 factions involved, which is not a typical thing in these games, usually head to head. And one of them is like the remnants of the Nazi regime, but they're like completely polluted and physically manifested their mental state, basically, because they're just these evil like comic book villains at that point in the game, with like zombies and stuff like that, and like just weird like Fallout kind of ideas. And there's a cool narrative campaign that you can play through that, and you can play that game very very easily solo, because of the chit pull mechanism. It makes it easy to solo, and you can play through kind of the various different factions. You have kind of the allies are still around. You have kind of the remnants of the Axis, and then you have like the crazy messed up Nazis and stuff like that are just total dirtbags, physically and of course morally, spiritually, and mentally, like they are in real life. So it's a really fun game. I just want to kind of give a shout out to that one, because I don't play a lot of these big theater games, but Nuclear Winter 68 is kind of a fun game too. It's a little bit lighter than No Retreat, but it has some of that kind of big sort of higher level things. It's a smaller level, of course. No Retreat is like the big sort of full, like large macroscopic view of the war, or this particular theater of the war, whereas Nuclear Winter's, it's not quite a squad level game, but it's getting down there. So that's number 30, No Retreat. Number 29, shifting gears, is Trajan from Stefan Feld. This is my favorite Stefan Feld game. I absolutely adore this game. It is just a absolute mess and nightmare of a smorgasbord of mechanics, but I love it for that. Funnily enough, the theme of kind of logistically managing all of your sort of fools at court that you have to do with this kind of weird Mancala mechanism to try to manage like the logistics of all the people kind of surrounding you and going off and like figuring out different aspects of Rome, like rebuilding the city, sending kind of troops and military units up to north and into Europe more, kind of messing with the politics of the Senate and all that stuff. It's all super abstract, of course, but something about just the way this thing kind of comes together, the kind of weird sort of future planning you can do with the Mancala, where you kind of build up a collection of these little stones, these little like cylinders that are wood, and then spinning them up and then executing like a big kind of explosive action that has a lot of, you know, stones built up into it. That whole like planning process is really neat, and sort of just in the abstract expression of the feeling of managing logistics just baked into that Mancala without doing it in a simulationist kind of way. It's just really, really neat, and it's a lot of fun, and it's a game I've played dozens and dozens of times, and I would always play this at the drop of a hat. Absolute, just love the game. I love it at 2, 3, and 4 players. It's great at all those counts. I just love it. There's a lot of cool kind of interaction. There's not a lot of direct interaction in this game, but unlike some Feld games, some Felds are very interactive, but this one is like, it's got that sort of passive-aggressive interaction that a lot of Euro games have, but it's very much like, oh, I need to be planning to take over this little track and sort of path on the buildings or moving my military unit around to get there before the other players. And so that kind of bakes into your planning. So it still feels very interactive in that way, but I'm not like directly hitting the person, but everybody kind of knows what everybody's after. And so you've got to kind of pick and choose the paths that you have to go. And it has a Castles of Burgundy vibe, which you would have seen on last video in this series. But this one's just kind of amped up a little bit more crazy and nutty. And just I love how crazy it is. You know, it just doesn't make any sense on the surface, but it just all kind of fits together. And the alternative to this would be the other Stefan Feld game that I really, really adore. These will be the last two that I talk about. So it's Trajan. Castles of Burgundy, I talked about Jorvik, or Speicherstadt as it was formerly known in the last video. And then Bora Bora is the other one I really enjoy. And for a while I thought kind of Bora Bora was my favorite Feld game. It's probably the one I was best at. I seem to be able to win that one more often than these other ones. And but you know, frankly, I couldn't get really people to play with me. It just didn't really hit with family, or you know, even some of the gamer friends in the gamer group. As much as some of the others. It wasn't easy to pull out. It's a little bit obtuse in a way, and it's sort of, there's like a weird sort of layer of like, what am I actually doing here? And even though I really like the game, I still kind of get that feeling after a while. Like when I'd come back to it after not playing it for some time, I was kind of like, this doesn't really quite match up. And so I think back when I would really, really like this, I was kind of in the throes of the Feld obsession. You know, there's another game called Luna, which I really, really used to like. And it also, it's just like, it's a little bit off-putting in terms of its abstractness. And for me, it just doesn't marry up quite as nicely as like Trajan or Castles of Burgundy does. So Bora Bora's kind of dropped off. But I really recommend folks do try Bora Bora, because the thing that kind of links to Trajan is that just weirdness about it. It's just got a very, very weird vibe to it that doesn't quite make sense. I think in Trajan it does kind of stick the landing, so to speak, but in Bora Bora it almost sticks the landing, but it's just so funky that I recommend folks at least give it a shot to just kind of check it out and try it. And the other kind of nod I would give would be Aquasphere, which is also, I think, hits the landing probably a little bit better than Bora Bora, but I prefer Bora Bora just because, you know, whatever. Yeah, so that's it. So Feld is a weird cat when it comes to game designs, but he hits probably more often than he doesn't for me. So that's number 29. Number 28, getting back to kind of the war game thing, this is Combat Commander Europe. This is a squad level game, kind of like Squad Leader, Advanced Squad Leader, Conflict of Heroes, Band of Brothers. Those are some games I played. I haven't played any of the Squad Leader games, but those other ones I have. And it's a 2-player head-to-head card driven. Again, you'll find this theme through some of the following videos and some of the previous ones. I like stuff when it's driven by cards. It's just kind of a inkling that I have. It's a card driven sort of hex and counter squad level war game. You play some very kind of specific scenarios that are set up kind of like a puzzle. I talked about that I think in the last video, or the video before that actually, about Claustrophobia 1643. So it has that same sort of like, let's set the scenario up. We're going to kind of weight it towards, you know, one side or the other, Germans, Americans, and so on. And then it's going to be kind of a puzzle for the other side to kind of figure out, you know, how best to do it. And that's one aspect of the game I really like. The thing that I like most about it is its absolute cinematic flavor that it has. And I've talked a little bit about a mechanic here, and it's the card-driven mechanic. And so there's actually no dice in the game. But what you have here is a hand of cards that you can do to kind of like augment your kind of normal actions of moving troops around and shooting and all that kind of stuff. And then the cards, you flip cards to roll dice because it's got little outcomes on there and dice, and there could be little events and things that happen also with the cards. And so you have this sort of what could be a very dry, sort of staccatic and static, you know, hex and counter game that's just punctuated by random events in a way. But it makes it, in some senses, cinematic, in almost like a Hollywood sense, but not quite to the sense where I mean that in a superficial way. But it's almost like a way of just drama that gets inflected in the game. And it's very hard to explain this. I think I did an okay job of it in my review video for it. You can go look that up. But this game has that in spades, and it just is one of those things, because there's a lot of times if you talk to, you know, war gamers and stuff, like there's points in certain games where you kind of get like the chills a little bit, and you kind of get into, I don't know, some sort of state with the game. I don't want to be like pretentious about it, but it happens, okay? You get into like a state of consciousness with the game where it puts you in a place sometimes emotionally and other ways when you think about the reality of what you're kind of doing on the board. Right? It's not a BS thing. And this game really has that in spades. And I really cannot recommend it enough if you can find it. It kind of goes in and out of print, but I can't recommend it enough. If you've never tried a war game, this would probably be the first one I would actually say, although there might be one or two higher on the list that I think, for me personally, but if you're like, I want to play a war game, I would just recommend this, because the rules are actually very, very easy to get into. They're written in that kind of that GMT style with like the point, you know, sub point thing, but it's easy and smooth to get into, and it's easy to reference. And if you just commit a little bit of time with it, probably not more than you would like a sort of medium heavy Euro, you can get into it, and you kind of like let a little bit of the chaos happen. You will start to see some of the strategies and stuff that are there, and some of the kind of the tactical thoughts you have to take into account. But to me, this is just absolutely a gold mine of a game, and I just can't recommend it enough for folks to try. And it's just a great experience, and I can't say enough about it. I love the game. So it's a two-player only game. The alternative would be, I mentioned like Band of Brothers and Conflict of Heroes, and those games are great. Heroes of Normandy is another great hex and counter squad level game. All good. Those are all great games. The other one I want to kind of link to, though, is Upfront. And I mentioned this last time I did a top 50. Now, Upfront, you can find Upfront, I think on Drive-Thru Cards or something like that, you can find it. You go look online or go to Board Game Geek, you can find it there. So somebody has eventually now picked it up, because it was going to get reprinted. There was a whole nightmare in Kickstarter. It didn't actually happen. I really enjoy Upfront. It is a card-only game, so you build up terrain with the cards, you play with the cards, your troops are little tiny cards that you have, and you kind of move them in this sort of this abstract sort of like, almost like lanes. You know, if you played like, what's that new Marvel Snap game? It's not like Marvel Snap, but you know, in that game you have lanes on the app game. The lanes are a little different. They're like rows more than lanes, I guess you could say. But you have this whole thing, and you have this kind of card-driven, flipping cards for outcomes and all that kind of stuff. And it's a really cool game too, and it has this interesting thing. I like Combat Commander Europe a little bit better, just because it has, you're just able to get more out of it by having a board and stuff like that. But if you can go find a copy of Upfront, it's also kind of a very different, cool experience that I would recommend. And I'm surprised this game hasn't really been like revisited, I guess is the right word, with a new edition or something. Somebody has to do this because it would be really cool. But yeah, Combat Commander Europe, number 28, no question, I recommend. Number 27 is Dead Reckoning. This was a game that showed up on my top games of the year last year. What else do I say about this game? I think it's great. The Solitaire, I haven't tried Solitaire. 2, 3, and 4 player, I think I've played all those player counts. And it's absolutely great. It's that card crafting system that you've seen in Mystic Vale and other games like that. This is the one that I really think it marries itself to the theme. It's a pirate theme. You're going out and establishing bases, shipping goods, fighting other pirate ships, other players. It has cool story elements when you mix in the first couple little card pack expansions that just take the game to the next level. And it's solid. It's got great streamlined mechanics. It's just such an investment of joy with the game. I just absolutely adore the game. This is one that I constantly think about, like, man, because we're playing these other games in my group, and it's like, I wish we could make some more time to play Dead Reckoning a lot more and do like a big old 6-part campaign and all that. And it's just, I think it's for me, it hits all of the buttons. It's got good, solid Euro-ish mechanics with a little bit of luck and some cool, like very clever mechanics to kind of handle combat and the story elements and all that stuff that I talked about. I haven't played a lot of pirate games, but to me, this is the pirate game. And like I said, the player count, I don't think it really matters. There are some considerations you have to do with the 4-player game. It's a little tighter, but I like that. It's a lot more cutthroat, I think. The other thing I would say, so my alternative is really nothing, but I'm going to throw Merchants and Marauders on here. Now, I have not played it. Some friends in the group have played it. There's debate, I think, among them, which is the better pirate game, Dead Reckoning or Merchants and Marauders, but I'll throw that up there because that often gets touted as kind of like the pirate game. But, my friends always kind of caveat to me some of the issues they have with Merchants and Marauders, right? So, yeah, so I just put that out there. I don't remember all the caveats because I've not played it. But for me, Dead Reckoning, there's no caveats. It's absolutely perfect, and I love it, and I can't wait to see what other stuff they come out with for it. So that's number 27. Let's see, number 26 is Return to Dark Tower. This was my top game from last year, and I can't say enough about it. I mean, I've already talked about it not too many months ago. It's fantastic. I love how it scales difficulty, how you can kind of push and pull and plug and play different heroes with different villains, with different quests and all these different things, and layer stuff on, and layer different parts of the expansions on to make it more or less complicated. So you can play it with kids, so you can just play some basic scenarios, or you can just ratchet it up if you're playing with your gamer friends and just have a big old huge puzzle. I think the analogy that I used before was you can take it from like vanilla Pandemic level to all the way up to almost like Spirited Island. Spirit of the Island, I can't remember the name of the game. Spirit Island, that's right. Sorry. That level, almost close to that level of complexity. Kind of tinker around with it and just really turn the dial on the difficulty, which I really like, because if you just want to sit down and have kind of a fun adventure, you could do that, or you can just, really crank it up, make it as impossible as you possibly want. And it's just a great sort of piece to set up on the table with the tower and spitting the skulls out and making noise and all these things. And it has that high adventure sort of feel to it, which you'll see on some of the games future up on the list that I really enjoy in a co-op, where it feels like you're playing kind of a puzzly co-op, but you're bouncing between that kind of attitude and like this kind of a questy sort of adventure-y vibe, which is really cool, kind of leveling up your little troop of people. Absolutely love the game. All the player counts, solo, all the way up. It doesn't matter to me. 1, 2, 3, 4. Perfect. Whatever. Let's play. The alternative, nothing. There's no alternative to this. Any alternative would probably be, higher on the list, so to speak. But even those, there's not really a good alternative. This is such like an enigma, a unicorn of a game with the frickin' tower and everything. There's no alternative idea for this one. So, yeah, that's number 26, Return to Dark Tower. Let's see, number 25 would be Star Wars Rebellion, and this is a great game. You can play 2 or 4 players. You can play it 3 players. I can't remember, I think I played it 3 players. It would have been years ago. because you just have, you know, kind of a naval side and a general side on each side if you're playing teams, and then if you're playing 3, just one guy controls both. I think that's right. It's been years since I did that. But it's absolutely the Star Wars game to me, and you're basically playing through the original trilogy of stories, and you can have all kinds of alternate outcomes. You know, Obi-Wan could go to the dark side and all these kinds of different things. It's fantastic, and I like it because it could just be kind of like a dudes on the map game, because it kind of has that vibe where you're moving troops around and sort of squads of ships and all this stuff and taking over planets if you're the Empire. But the rebels are trying to just kind of avoid getting captured and getting destroyed, and then trying to sort of plant the seeds of rebellion and all that kind of stuff. And they're just trying to basically be the insurgent. So if you think of like a coin game or something like that, this feels very much like a coin game, just in the kind of its own sort of Star Wars universe. And you may or may not see a coin game further up on this list. You will, but I'm just going to tell you, this is just like a coin game to me. And I love that it's a team game, because some of the better coin games work well when you're kind of playing 2v2 for a little while. Now this is team all the way through, but it just has so many cool aspects of games that you just don't often see in a game. Usually it's like, oh, it's an area control game, or it's, you know, let's wipe each other out, or it's this or that. But you have all these kind of disparate objectives that are kind of tugging and pulling on all your decisions as you're kind of moving through and trying to, you know, defend yourself or attack and that kind of stuff. And it just works out beautifully. It's just beautiful. I talked about player count. The alternative would be War of the Ring, which is a great game, and I've played that game, and that's basically Lord of the Rings, another trilogy encompassed in a game. And, you know, War of the Ring is a fantastic game. Frankly, if you pin me down, yeah, I'm more of a Star Wars guy than a Lord of the Rings guy. You know, it's just, well, I don't know why. That's just how I am. And, you know, but that's a great game. That's another really cool kind of game based on an IP, based on a big epic IP that spans multiple movies in this case, or books. And I could really recommend both. So in my opinion, if you like either of those IPs and you're okay with like a somewhat complex game, then I could not recommend either of these games enough. I don't know how readily in print they are. I know they both kind of come in and out of print. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm trying to think. I think Rebellion's still in print. I know War of the Ring definitely goes in and out of print. But I can't recommend enough if you're fans of those IPs. Let's see. So that's number 25. Number 24 is Battle Lore 2nd edition. This is a Command and Colors series game. If you're not familiar with those, you get it's another fighting game. You got 2 armies going against each other. You play cards to kind of activate different units on different sort of lanes of the map and stuff like that. This is the fantasy version. It's the 2nd edition of the original fantasy version. This is my favorite Command and Colors game. It's the only one you'll see on this list, other than the alternative, which I'll mention in a minute. And it's great. You have the cards. You've got the whole kind of cool gameplay. Some people don't like the Command and Color system. I really do. I think it's a lot of fun. I like the addition of the magic here. You've got 3 different armies, and you've got kind of like within the 3 different armies, you've got 2 sort of separate armies or army packs. So there's a lot of variety and stuff for the different units you can choose. There's some mercenary units you can get, kind of like draft beforehand. This one is not in print, so you can find it. You can find it not too expensive. I've seen it pretty cheaply. Some of the other expansions and stuff might get a little expensive, but I don't think you need them. They're nice to have, though. If you really like the game, it's kind of fun to build little armies and stuff. It's basically like playing old school Warhammer Fantasy, but without the nightmare of the nightmare of Warhammer Fantasy, basically. And it's a little card driven, it's easier to get into, and it's got a lot of cool extra things that some of the other Commands and Colors don't have. With the way you can do deployments, you can build up sort of like hidden deployments and then reveal your scenario cards, and you have different objectives, and there's like a cool little campaign mode that you can do. It's just cool. It's just like if you want like a big army game, I think I talked about it last week, where like the Relic, or sort of the Grail game of like the 2-hour Civ game that's kind of a Euro game. This is like the Grail game of like a quick but big massive army game, but it's quick and easy to play and all that stuff. So it's got the same vibes as all that, but you can get it done, and it's not like a big money investment or anything, although it's out of print, so it might be a little bit of a money investment, but relatively speaking. And it is a lot of fun. It's just seat of your pants, Ameritrash dice throwing, just throw tactical combat and all that stuff right at each other's face. It's just a fun game. Now the alternative, it's a 2-player only game. Although you could do like the commander or whatever it's called, and maybe do 2v2, but it would just be 2 teams and get 2 games. But it's not really a supported system. Now the alternative has this. This is Memoir 44, and I would say I like Memoir 44. That'd be the alternative. There's a bunch of other good ones. There's the Command and Colors Ancients, Napoleonics. There's the Samurai Battles game, which I kind of debated picking as the alternative versus Memoir 44. I think Samurai Battles is probably the most like Battlelore 2nd Edition. It has some similar mechanics there. With the honor in Battlelore, they have the lore. Basically, it's like mana. And in the Samurai Battles, they have the honor mechanic, which is it's interesting how that works. It's a similar thing. So I would recommend that one too. But Memoir 44 is easy to get. It's always in print. I played that one. Well, I played both Battlelore and Memoir 44 with my son. Both the games, you can do that easily. You can sort of make the deck of cards sort of tailor-made to be a little bit easier. So you can kind of like gradually get them into some of the more like crunchy decision makings, and the games are perfect for that. So you can just set up troops, take out some of the more specialized cards, and just do the easy, okay, activate, move these troops, move them up, fight, roll dice. That just keep going back and forth with that, and then kind of slowly introduce some of the more complex stuff. And Memoir is great for that, and Memoir is really cool. I like it because it's a lot of the Command and Colors games are very melee oriented, where the Memoir games are big time range oriented. So you don't really, it's a different sort of mindset. So a lot of the Battlelore games, the Command and Color games, can kind of get down into, march the armies up, fight, do this, do that. You have some archers and stuff sometimes, but the Battlelore one kind of mixes it up with all the magic and some of the different special abilities and stuff like that. The Memoir one is cool because you have this whole other like headspace that you're in, and that to me, if you kind of just took it at that base sort of separation, melee versus kind of ranged, Memoir kind of wins there. But to me, Battlelore makes up for it with all the other cool stuff that it has. So that would be my alternative. So that's number 24, Battlelore. Number 23 is Forbidden Stars. Good luck finding this one. I apologize. Forbidden Stars is a Warhammer 40k game made by Fantasy Flight. It is, you have the Space Marines, the Chaos Marines, the Orcs, and the Eldar that you use, and it's a big dudes on the map game, big epic scale, and you move dudes around, take over planets, and build up bases and generate stuff. There's a deck building mechanic for the combat, which is neat, which is like you do deck building with dice. It's based on the old StarCraft board game that Fantasy Flight used to make, but it's kind of like a new iteration of that. It's fun, it's fantastic. I would play it at any player count, 2, 3, and 4. It's cool because it's not just take over territory and win. It's also has that weird kind of idea with like Star Wars Rebellion. We have these kind of other objectives that you're trying to go after that I really, really liked. So it keeps you kind of thinking and guessing about what people's intentions are and that kind of stuff. It's got a really cool like action economy system that you just don't normally see in a lot of these dudes on the map area control games. That's really fun. I can't recommend it enough. If you can find it relatively cheaply. I've seen it go like normal prices and then get really high. Don't pay a ton for it, I would say. It's really great. It's got a great cult following. People have made like 6 other expansion factions and generated all the bits and tokens and cards for them. One of these days I'm going to pull them down because I hear a lot of good things about them, and it'd be cool to have some of these other 40k factions, in play. And you can go get like miniatures from the old 40k Epic game that are kind of the same scale, I guess. But yeah, I apologize for having this one on here because, it's going to be really hard to find, but absolutely love the game. Like I said, all the player counts. It's just fun. It just pulls you in all these different ways. Now, the alternative is, I put this one on here. It's called Rune Wars. It's an old game from Fantasy Flight. It's kind of a fantasy version of Forbidden Stars in a way, where it's like a dudes on the map, kind of big, sort of epic, almost Civilizations, Kingdom style game. It has some cool stuff kind of going on the edges with the different seasons that it has, and also the different quests. You can send your heroes on quests, so you kind of like, different parts of the game. And sort of the thread here with like Rebellion, Forbidden Stars, Rune Wars, War of the Ring even, is you have like the big large scale battles that you're kind of managing, but then you also have these individual kind of character stories that are going on. So like, you know, at the end of Return of the Jedi, you have the big fight, all the spaceships fighting, and you've got like Luke and Vader in the room with the Emperor. Like that's a plot point. And I like the games that kind of do that, because you have like the big large scale fights, but then you've got the very specific sort of character points that are sort of going in parallel with that. And that's really, really cool. And Rune Wars has that kind of vibe too. And I think Rune Wars is still getting reprinted. I'm not super sure, but you should be able to find it that one a little bit easier than Forbidden Stars, and it has a fantasy vibe. It's set in their Terranoth universe, and so on. So that's number 23. And then we have number 22, and that is Twilight Struggle. I've mentioned that a few times going through the list here. Twilight Struggle is, you know, it used to be number 1 on Board Game Geek. There's not much else to say about this game. 2-player head-to-head, 1-player USA, other player USSR, kind of vying and manipulating and controlling the rest of the world to try to become the superpower. It's very historical and thematic, and has the cards, which I mentioned earlier in the video. I love all the card-driven stuff. It's got some really unique scoring and lots of other things. It's spawned a lot of progenitors and all kinds of different things. And it's just really tight. This game is a game that if you invest time in it, it's relatively straightforward and simple mechanically. Strategically, it takes a lot of plays to get into and kind of understand the deck of cards, because you move through them kind of historically in a way. There's not like a specific order, but you have like an early, mid, and a late war deck that get kind of shuffled in as you are going through the game. And then as you play cards, they might come back up later. So you can kind of put cards away that come back through the discard pile into the deck. And then you've got the whole mechanic of, you know, I play this card for the action points on the card, but the event might be for my opponent, so that'll trigger that. So we've got that whole balancing thing. And that's kind of its big, you know, innovation, which we've seen some iteration on that with some recent games. Flashpoint South China Sea, talked about that a couple of videos ago in this series. There's not really much else to say. It's a fantastic, amazing game. 2-player only. The alternative is 1989, and if you pinned me down and said which is the better game, honestly I would struggle with Twilight Struggle versus 1989. 1989 has a little bit more going on mechanically. 1989 is almost like the epilogue to Twilight Struggle, so you could play Twilight Struggle and then 1989 after Twilight Struggle, just to kind of cinch it up, like the very end of communism in Eastern Europe. And that's all focused on Germany and stuff like that. Now I have Wer sind das Volk earlier on my list, and I would prefer that over 1989 because of I think it's a cooler take on that theme. So it's weird space. I was like, which one is better? And I've complained about this whole listing ordering thing before. And this, you kind of tie yourself into a knot, you know? So I have to it's very hard to make the list. It's not hard to talk about the games, but the listing is difficult. But I prefer Twilight Struggle, and I give it the bump because just the epicness of it and the scale of it and the depth of the strategy that goes along with all that epicness of it, the broad sort of timeline of it, it wins me over. But 1989 has some really cool, interesting sort of things. So if you like Twilight Struggle, I would recommend 1989, no question. And it's just kind of a nice sort of counterpiece to Twilight Struggle. It's very similar, has a lot of the same mechanics, but has some cool different things with like the battle cards, which was in another card-driven game. I can't remember which one. It's spacing me. I think it wasn't set in antiquity. Somebody will comment and say. But it has a battle mechanic that was kind of lifted out of another game, and then it was, more focused than Twilight Struggle. It's only 1989, only in Germany and Eastern Europe. But yeah, number 22, Twilight Struggle. Let's see, so last one, number 21, is Tigris and Euphrates, Reiner Knizia game. This is my favorite Reiner Knizia game. It is a classic. I think at one time I could have told you it was my favorite game of all time when I was a young whippersnapper in the hobby or something, years ago, because it was just, to me, the game is confounding. It is just a majestic piece of ancient design that somehow Reiner Knizia dug up from the substrate of the human subconsciousness. I know that sounds like a bunch of baloney, but the game feels like it was originally designed during the time that it takes place somehow, because it's so abstract and it's so, to me, it carries so much meaning with it, just because of the theme that you have with kind of like you're building up these little empires and kingdoms, and you have the different tiles that you place out and they're different meanings. So you have like the farmers and the war tiles, well, the religious tiles, which is the same as the war tiles, which is ironic and not so funny. And then you have the merchant tiles and the leader tiles, the black ones. And so that whole kind of aspect of it, of like having that strength in those particular domains, but then abstract out like a freaking chessboard or checkers board or something, is really cool. And the scoring thing at the end, where you have to kind of be good at all of them to win. And it actually has, it's like a Euro game with direct conflict, you know. It's just cool, and it puts you in this cool headspace, and it feels very card-like, because you get like a hand of tiles that you can kind of discard and draw and try to build up, you know, a dominance in a certain color for a little while, and you have to kind of shift gears and do this back and forth. Like I said, it just feels, you know, there's an ancientness to me. Like every time I crack it open and play it, I like feel like there's sand coming off of these tiles. You know, they don't feel like cardboard. They feel like little wooden or little stone little tablets and stuff that we're placing out. I don't know. I just get a vibe from it, and I just love it. Player count wise, you gotta be 3 or 4 players. 2 players is, you know, no. You need the extra elements at the table to kind of pull your mind in different directions. 2 players is okay. I will play it, but you're just missing out on the extra layers of like getting people to fight each other and all that stuff, and you know, kind of trying to worm your way through without getting smashed by left and right. And I like that aspect of it. So yeah, 3 and 4 players would be the best. The alternative, I would say, would be Samurai, which is another Reiner Knizia game that I really, really like. It's a tile placement game as well. Totally different thing, more like an area control tile placement game. But I think in my review years ago, I looked at it as kind of like the Electoral College is the game, because you had to like win like different, almost like winning different parties or something. You're influencing different sort of caste systems or political entities, the samurais and the farmers and the priests or whatever it's called. And everybody has the exact same tiles. They have a hand of tiles, and you're trying to dominate the different, you know, political sort of entities in that game. And it's really cool. And that one's very numbery. I really like it. I still have it in my collection. It's a little bit more straightforward, I would say, than Tigers and Euphrates, although the scoring is just as obtuse. Maybe more obtuse than Samurai, because the tiebreaker thing can be a little bit like, okay, now what happens? But once you do that once, you know, you'll get it. So yeah, so that's the alternative. There aren't any of his auction games on here, which I've sort of fallen in and out of favor, just to kind of mention it. Right now, my main kick is Modern Art from him. It would be in my top 100 if I was doing down to 100 Modern Art. And I've gone back and forth. Like Ra has been my favorite auction game. Medici has been my favorite auction game. I like Razia, which is, nobody brought that over. It's kind of like a slight variant on Ra, and people think I'm crazy, but I'm like, I think Razia is better than Ra, just because, I don't know, I'm not going to have this argument again. And then, what's the other one? Oh, I like High Society. That's one I still have on my shelf. That's not really an auction game, but it's kind of auction-esque. I like his auction games. Right now I have High Society and Modern Art. Those are the ones that I have. And I like those. And, you know, depending on, you know, what year and what day it is and what I had for lunch, I kind of look at those in different ways. It's just more of a matter of like if I'm into auctions or not. So I just want to kind of give a little nod there, because, you know, you're not going to see any more Reiner on this list. But, yeah. So Tigers, though, piece of cake. Get it. Okay, that's that for this video. I will see you next time.